So first off, let me apologise for not putting out a video in quite a while. To cut a long story short, a bunch of people in my house got ill, then I got ill, which got in the way of editing, and then when I did get around to putting a video together, I wasn't quite happy with it, so I decided to buy a whole bunch of new equipment, which I then had to learn how to use. And now, 8 weeks later, here we are. Anyway, forget about all of that because today is a great day. I'm over the moon to introduce a completely brand new series to my channel, something completely original, something I've never done before. It is brand new, it is brand new, it is brand new. Actually, if you're a long-term fan of my content, then you'll quickly realise that this is a regurgitated rehash of the content that I used to put out on my previous channel, but we'll just keep that between you and me. So with all of that out of the way, let me introduce you to my new series, Does It Hold Up? What's the purpose or goal of this series, I hear you ask? Well, it's to take a look at the great games and cult classics of the past and simply ask the question, does it hold up? And the first game up in this new series is Rainbow Six Vegas. Released on the PS3, 360 and PC back in 2006, Rainbow Six Vegas was the first game in a long-running franchise to appear on what was, at the time, the next-gen consoles. No matter what measure you go by, it did pretty well, whether it was the strong review scores across the board from major publications, or the almost 2 million copies sold in roughly 6 months, or the game's successful run in the MLG circuit. In 2006, I was already a fan of the series, and this one caught my eye and blew me away with its visuals immediately. I'm pretty sure I played a demo of the game a stupid amount of times before it was released. And hey, remember when demos were a thing? What made it so great according to the reviews at the time was that it took an already established franchise and gave it a new and fresh vibe, placing the team in fancy hotels and casinos. It introduced a new and intuitive cover mechanic, making peeking around corners much simpler, adding another element to the gameplay. It featured a great soundtrack that not only sounded cool but also made everything more tense, and on top of this, it was complemented by a well-made and varied multiplayer mode. It was a great overall package and arguably one of the best shooters around until Halo 3, Modern Warfare and Bioshock would come out a year later. It was a game that I personally enjoyed a hell of a lot and hold incredibly fond memories for, so it was an obvious pick for me in this series because I wanted to find out if nostalgia had blinded me to its flaws. So now we ask the all-important question, does it hold up? It's been really interesting returning to a game from this era of Ubisoft and the Tom Clancy brand. Back in the early 2000s, I feel like I was all in on anything that featured the Tom Clancy name. Rainbow Six, I'm there. Ghost Recon, sign me up. Splinter Cell, take my money now. End war. This is my third time playing through Rainbow Six Vegas. I played it the first time pretty much on release day, I played it again a few years later, and both of those times I remember really enjoying it, and returning to it this third time, well, it didn't get off to the best start. I'll be perfectly honest with you, about 20 minutes into my playthrough, I came very close to giving up on this game and binning the idea for the series entirely. The game didn't look as great as I remembered, which knocked me back a bit. I died a bunch of times, seemingly out of nowhere, and was then punished by its horrible checkpoints. There was a moment where I just sat there for a good 5 minutes, staring at the game over screen, controller in my hand, just thinking about how much of a slog this was going to be to finish, and how I'm going to have to make a video tearing down one of my old favourites. For that evening, I decided to give up and return to it tomorrow. After playing for about another hour, suddenly I had a realisation, which was, oh yeah, old Tom Clancy games do not mess around. Essentially, what had happened with my first little session with the game was that I was simply playing it wrong. Approaching this game like a regular FPS is just going to get you killed, and when you get killed you'll get sent back about 5 minutes to the last checkpoint, and through increased frustration you'll try to rush through the areas that you just cleared out, which will then lead to more deaths, and the cycle continues. When I started playing Rainbow Six Vegas the way it was meant to be played, all of the fun I remembered from back in the day quickly returned. I was now approaching every single corner with caution. I was using the snake camera to check out every single door. I was using my squad more effectively instead of just hoping they'd back me up when needed. Basically, I started playing it like a tactical shooter. The game forced me to rethink my usual approach to every situation, and even though the checkpoints are super far apart, in a way I suppose you could also consider that part of the game's design, because if it was auto-saving every 30 seconds, the tension is somewhat removed because you know there's not much progress to lose, but I could be reading into things a bit too much there. The plot and things going on between the main characters are all so-so if I'm honest. All you need to know is that there are terrorists in Vegas and you need to stop them, but I did find myself really appreciating the general vibe. Vegas is such a good setting in my opinion. There's something about the really bright environment that is usually a place for fun and excitement being taken over by violence and chaos, and it contrasts really well. I think a big part of why I considered this game so eye-catching in 2006 is that even though in some parts it does show its age visually, it's hard to deny that the saturated neon-lit spaces that you work through don't help mask some of its technical flaws, because when you're in a firefight, it's just fun to see all of it fall apart. While we're on the subject of visuals, I will say that it is incredibly hit and miss. I never came up with a term to describe these sorts of games, but I've seen a lot of them, and the best way to describe how Rainbow Six Vegas looks is to say that it looks like a game from the previous generation, simply up-res to HD. Being that it only came out a year after the 360, that's not a massive shocker, but when you get up close and personal with some of the assets, especially the weapon models, I definitely thought that they may have been rushed or just simply taken from a previous game. Actually, that's a bit of a theme with this title, as I did notice multiple elements such as gun sound effects and animations clearly taken from one of the previous Splinter Cell games, and I am 99.9% sure that the grunt noise that the main character makes when being shot is literally the same noise Sam Fisher makes when he takes a hit. I can't say with any certainty what this means, whether the game was put together in a really short space of time, or whether people at Ubisoft were just sharing assets all over the place back then and I just happened to notice it on this occasion, but I can say that there are parts of Vegas that could use more work. The AI in particular for both enemies and your squad will be, let's say, inconsistent throughout your playthrough. The enemies will have moments where they put real pressure on you in smart ways by throwing a grenade to get you out of cover that you're safely tucked behind, while another flanks you, and before you know it your screen is covered in red. At other times they just charge right at you in very open spaces, which gives you plenty of time to gun them down as they make very little effort to find cover. In the case of your own teammates, it's the same experience. I watched them save my own life on quite a few occasions by catching the last remaining enemy that I missed while scanning a room. I watched them throw a flashbang into a room and then headshot everybody in there within a few seconds, but I've also watched them hide behind cover for 2 minutes straight as they blind fire over a barrier, hitting absolutely nobody until both of them need reviving. After a few hours in, I realised that the best way to utilise my squad was to treat them like canaries into a mine. In the real world, I'd be a terrible squad leader for sending my men in first while I sit back and take a good look at what's going on, just hoping that one of the bad guys pops their head up so I can engage from a safe distance. But in the world of Rainbow Six Vegas, I'm the perfect man for the job. The reason I took this approach, apart from wanting to avoid a cheap death, was because with this game you never know what's around the corner, which works for and against the game in some ways. The feeling that 5 people could be on the other side of any door you walk up to, or there could be a sneaky enemy all the way across one of its larger areas carefully watching you with a rifle, well, that stuff adds tension, which is great, but my only real issue with this is that if you don't know what's ahead, you can't prepare, and if you can't prepare, it feels like you're missing out on some of the game's features. This game offers a decent selection of weapons, with assault rifles, SMGs, shotguns, snipers, pistols, grenades. All of them have their varied stats on damage, range and accuracy, and all of them can be customised a little bit too. The trouble is, even though I was in firefights in small tight areas, larger areas with a lot of obstacles, and huge long areas like the Vegas Strip, I never knew what was coming, so even though there were situations where it would have been useful for me to have a shotgun or a sniper rifle, there was no way for me to preempt this, so 9 times out of 10 I ended up using the same assault rifle and SMG that I felt was a good all-rounder combo. Even though I didn't get to experiment with as many weapons as I would have liked, I will say that the ones I used felt nice to work with. The shooting in general is solid, if not a little shaky at times, but I suppose that's part of the realism element of picking your shots wisely, but you can always change your fire mode to a single shot to give you that extra stability when you need to engage from long range. The cover system and switching from first to third person also works well. Once you've got your head around the control scheme, it really does give you every opportunity to play out each scenario as safely as possible and get a better view of the action. At times I felt like the aiming from cover was a little unpredictable because I didn't know if my character was going to lean to the side or over the top of an obstacle, but it didn't dampen the experience overall. So if I were to answer the question, does this hold up? I think my answer would be yes, ... kinda. Now, the reason I say this is that all of the compliments that were made about it 15 years ago still apply. The only thing I would say, however, is that it might be a stronger game for those returning to it than it would be for someone approaching it for the first time. If you're playing this again for the first time in over 10 years, you'll eventually warm up to it and have all the fun that you had back then. The gameplay is great, the missions are well structured and not too drawn out. The shootouts can be nerve-wracking in a fun way, and overall it still holds a certain charm. For those who've never played it before, your time with it may be less enjoyable if you've spent the last 15 years playing with the modern style of FPS that we have today, and what I mean by that is that it's possibly not the same amount of value behind a title like this, because at times it can be quite punishing. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that this is the Dark Souls of shooters, but what I am saying is when I struggled in the early hours of the campaign and wanted to put it down, what kept me pushing on was my own nostalgia and curiosity, which was eventually rewarded. Either way, if you do manage to pick up a copy, I'm sure whoever you are or whatever your experiences are, you can still pretty much have a good time. You just need to be aware of what type of game you're getting into.
Go! Over there! Roger!
And those are my thoughts on Rainbow Six Vegas. Does it hold up? Absolutely, within the right context, but hopefully I've given you enough information to make an informed decision of your own. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video. I've been Inept Saiyan. As always, you've been a wonderful audience, and I hope to see you again soon.